There's a place in Tennessee where the ground once gave up something it was never supposed to reveal. Not gold, not oil, a skeleton. In the autumn of 1845, south of the small town of Franklin, men digging a well hit something they didn't expect. At first, they thought it was just rock, but as they kept digging, shapes started to appear. Curved, smooth, hollow. Bones, and not normal bones. The more they uncovered, the quieter the worksite became. They brushed away dirt from a thigh bone that was said to be over 5 feet long. They found a skull described as so large it could hold nearly 2 bushels inside its hollow space. By the time the workers were done, they weren't looking at a normal skeleton anymore. They were staring at what people would soon call a giant. A figure that, when assembled, some claimed to have stood close to 18 feet tall. Most of us would roll our eyes at that number today, but in 1845, this wasn't just a campfire story. It became a regional sensation. People paid money to see it, and many believed it was proof giants once walked the American South. This is the story people now call Tennessee's hidden giant unearthed, the 1845 secret. What was really found on that farm? A misidentified fossil? A deliberate hoax? Or a chapter of history that polite society quietly chose to forget? It all started on the farm of a man named William Shumate, just south of Franklin, Tennessee. In the fall of 1845, workers were digging a well, going deeper and deeper into the earth, around 50 feet down, when their tools suddenly hit something solid. They thought it was just a stone shelf, until a fractured piece came loose and revealed pale shapes behind it. As they pulled fragments up to the surface, they realized these weren't just random rocks. They were bones, and not from anything they recognized. The pieces were too thick, too long, too heavy. Accounts from the time described the skeleton in almost unbelievable terms. The thigh bone, longer than most men were tall from hip to head. The skull, massive, barrel-like, with eye sockets big enough to fit a grown person's fist. The jaw filled with heavy, oversized teeth that looked more like stones than anything human. Alongside the bones, workers reportedly found a few beads and a human tooth, as if the remains had been intentionally buried rather than just dumped there by chance. For people living in a world without dinosaur museums or paleontology documentaries, this was all shocking. You're a farmer, you've never seen a fossil, you have no idea what a mastodon is, and suddenly you're hauling up pieces of something that looks like a human scaled up to nightmare size. Of course, word spread. Neighbors came to look. Travelers stopped by. Curiosity turned the quiet farm into a local attraction almost overnight. Shumate and others quickly realized there was money to be made. According to later retellings, someone offered him a huge sum for the time, thousands of dollars, to buy the skeleton outright. He reportedly refused, deciding instead to exhibit it himself. The bones were wired together. A rough internal frame was built so the figure could stand upright. Wood was used to fill in gaps where bones were missing or too fragile. Once assembled, the towering form loomed over visitors, and the legend of the Tennessee giant began. People paid to step into a tent, look up at the skeletal figure, and walk back out stunned. Some thought it was a relic from a forgotten race of giants. Others saw it as living proof of old religious stories about giant beings, and some probably just saw it as a great piece of showmanship. Because, make no mistake, by this point, that's exactly what it was. A show, a traveling exhibit, moving from town to town, stopping in places like Lawrenceburg and beyond as it made its way south. The story was bigger than the facts, and the spectacle was more important than careful measurement. But that raises a huge question. Was any of it real? To answer that, you have to understand the 1800s. Back then, people were constantly digging into the ground, building wells, cutting roads, plowing fields, and opening mines. They ran into strange bones all the time. Sometimes these were from extinct animals like mastodons and mammoths. Sometimes they were from large normal animals, but very few people had the knowledge to tell the difference. Modern anthropologists who've revisited cases like the 1845 Tennessee giant point out familiar patterns. In many of these old stories, giant human skeletons were actually a mix of misunderstood animal bones, exaggerated descriptions, and in some cases, deliberate hoaxes. There are documented exhibits where real bones were combined with carved wood to create a more complete and more dramatic giant figure. Skulls were reconstructed, jaws were reshaped, and wooden teeth were added to make the figure look more human. Once you realize that, the picture changes. The 18-foot height starts to look less like a fact and more like marketing. The impressive jaw might have been part bone and part craftsmanship. The massive skull might have been shaped or repaired to fit the story people wanted to tell. And then there's the ever-present role of newspapers. In the 1800s, local papers loved sensational stories. A giant skeleton headlines better than farmers uncover some big ambiguous bones. There was no internet fact-checking, no easy way for readers to verify claims, so a single excited report could grow in the telling, town by town, year by year. At the same time, you had a culture already primed for giants. Religious readers recognized echoes of biblical giants. Folklore enthusiasts connected it to legends about monstrous beings from long ago. People wanted these skeletons to be human because that made the story meaningful, not just scientific. On the other side of the spectrum, modern conspiracies have added another layer. You've probably heard the idea that big institutions quietly suppressed or destroyed giant skeletons to keep history neat and tidy. It feels cinematic, and in some retellings of the Tennessee story, that's exactly what supposedly happened. The bones were boxed up, taken away by higher authorities, and never seen again. But when you look at how 19th century specimens were handled in real life, you don't always need a conspiracy to explain their disappearance. Bones were fragile, they crumbled when exposed to air, light, and handling. Many curiosities were stored poorly, mislabeled, sold, or lost. Others were outright fakes that stopped drawing crowds and were quietly discarded once they were no longer profitable. That doesn't mean every old account was a hoax, it just means the bar for evidence has to be higher than a handful of enthusiastic newspaper articles and a legendary reputation. So where does that leave Tennessee's hidden giant? On one hand, it's almost certainly not evidence that 18-foot-tall humans once lived in the state. There's no surviving skeleton, no verified measurements, no preserved specimen in any museum you can visit. The description fits well into a pattern of misinterpretation, exaggeration, and show business. On the other hand, the story still matters, just in a different way. It tells us how people in the 1800s struggled to understand what they found in the ground. It shows us how myth, religion, curiosity, and commerce all collided in a single discovery, and it points to something very real beneath Tennessee's soil. Long before that well was dug in 1845, the region was home to complex indigenous cultures who built mounds, crafted detailed artifacts, and buried their dead with care. Many of those sites were torn open in the 19th century by treasure hunters and curiosity seekers, destroying evidence that could have given us a clearer picture of the past. In the process, some people undoubtedly found large bones they didn't understand. So even if the giant of Tennessee wasn't truly a giant human, it sits on the edge between real archaeology and imaginative storytelling. It's a reminder that we haven't always been careful with the past, and that sometimes our desire for a wild story overshadows the quieter, more complicated truth. Maybe that's why tales like this still grab attention on YouTube today. They tap into the feeling that there might still be big secrets waiting under ordinary places: a farm field, a roadside hill, a forgotten well. They make you wonder what's under your feet that no one has ever seen. So what do you think actually happened in 1845? Was it a misidentified fossil from some huge extinct animal? A clever mix of real bone and carved wood built to cash in on public curiosity? Or something genuinely strange that we simply don't have enough evidence to explain? Until someone finds new, verifiable physical proof, the Tennessee giant will stay what it's been for more than 160 years. A story, a powerful one, a reminder that every so often the ground opens up and hands us a mystery, and it's up to us to decide what we're really looking at. And the next time you pass through a quiet stretch of Tennessee countryside and see a small rise in the land or an old sealed well, you might catch yourself thinking, is that just dirt and stone? Or is there another giant sleeping down there,